I found my roommate's diary shoved under my bed 3 weeks after he disappeared. The police had already searched our apartment. They missed it. I almost did too. But what was written inside, page after page, in handwriting that got smaller and more frantic as the weeks went on, made me wish I'd never found it at all. I found my roommate's diary shoved under my bed 3 weeks after he disappeared. The police had already searched our apartment. They missed it. I almost did too. But what was written inside, page after page, in handwriting that got smaller and more frantic as the weeks went on, made me wish I had never found it at all. My name is Daniel. I'm 26 years old. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in Tacoma, Washington, on the kind of street where the streetlights flicker after midnight and nobody thinks much of it. I moved in with Marcus about 8 months ago. We weren't close friends. We met through a listing on Craigslist. He seemed normal, quiet. He worked remotely doing something with data. I never asked too many questions. He paid his half of the rent on time. He kept to himself. That was enough for me. Marcus wasn't the type to make noise. Some weeks I'd go 2 or 3 days without seeing him at all. He'd slip in and out of his room like a shadow. He cooked late at night when he thought I was asleep. He never had visitors. The most conversation we ever had was about the thermostat. So when he was gone for a few days, I didn't panic. I figured he'd taken a trip. Maybe went to see family. It took me nearly a week before I knocked on his door and got nothing back but silence. His room was exactly as he'd left it. Bed made, laptop gone, a half-empty glass of water still sitting on the nightstand, the water slightly brown from evaporation. His coat was still on the hook by the front door. It was November in the Pacific Northwest. Nobody leaves without their coat. I called the non-emergency police line. They sent someone over. A tired-looking officer named Reyes who smelled like fast food and took down notes on a small pad. He told me that adults go missing all the time, that most of them turn up, that there was nothing immediately suspicious about an empty room. He looked around the apartment, checked the bathroom, the kitchen, peeked into Marcus's room. He said they'd open a missing persons file. He left his card on the kitchen counter. I never called it. 3 weeks went by. I kept his door closed. I stopped cooking because the kitchen felt wrong somehow, like the air in there had changed. I ordered delivery and ate on my bed and tried not to think about the glass of brown water still sitting on his nightstand behind that closed door. Then, one morning, I dropped my phone. It slid under the bed frame, and when I reached for it, my hand touched something hard and flat in the far corner. A notebook. Black cover, spiral bound, the kind you'd buy at a drugstore for $2. Marcus's name was written on the inside cover in blue ink, neat and deliberate, like a student labeling a textbook. I sat on the floor with my back against the bed and I opened it. The first dozen pages were unremarkable. Notes about his work, grocery lists, a few dates and times that didn't mean anything to me. His handwriting was clean and even, controlled. But somewhere around mid-September, things started to shift. September 14th. He wrote that he'd been hearing something in the walls, a slow scraping sound, like something dragging itself through the insulation. He thought it was rats. He wrote that he'd mentioned it to me, but I have no memory of that conversation. None at all. September 19th. The sound had moved. He was certain now it wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from underneath the apartment, from below the floor. He wrote that it only happened between 2 and 4 in the morning. He wrote that it sounded patient. I read that word 3 times. Patient. September 23rd. He'd started sleeping with the light on. He wrote that he'd looked up the history of the building online and found nothing notable. But he also wrote something that made my stomach drop. He wrote that he'd been watching the hallway through the crack under his door in the dark after the sound started. And one night he'd seen something move past. Just a shape. Low to the ground. Too wide to be a person walking. Too slow to be an animal. October 2nd. His handwriting was smaller now, pressed harder into the page. He wrote that whatever it was, it had started to learn his schedule. It was quiet when he worked. It was quiet when he cooked. But the moment he turned off his light and lay down, within minutes, the sounds would begin. He wrote that he'd started talking to it through the floor. Just whispers. He told himself it was a coping mechanism. He wrote, "I think it listened." October 9th. He hadn't slept in 4 days. His writing was cramped and uneven, the letters falling into each other. He wrote that he'd found a mark on the floor beside his bed, a long groove in the wood. He didn't make it. He was sure he didn't make it. He wrote that the groove had not been there the week before. He wrote it in the shape of something with fingers. October 15th. This entry was only 3 lines long. He wrote, "It knows my name. I heard it say my name through the floor last night. My full name. Nobody calls me by my full name." October 21st. The day before I noticed he was gone. The last entry in the diary. The handwriting was enormous now, shaking. Some letters were written over themselves twice, like his hand couldn't stay steady enough to form them once. He wrote that he had made a decision. He was going to go down to the basement. He needed to see it. He wrote that he'd been hearing it move toward the spot directly beneath his bed every night, and lying there, knowing it was just below him, just below the wood and concrete, was worse than whatever he might find if he looked. He wrote that he needed to know what it was. He wrote that he needed it to stop saying his name. Then, at the very bottom of the page, written in letters so small I had to hold the notebook up to the light to read them, were 5 words. "Daniel, it knows yours too." I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the center of my living room with every light on and the notebook in my lap, and I read through it again and again, trying to find a rational explanation. I told myself Marcus was unwell. I told myself he'd been suffering some kind of sleep disorder, some kind of paranoid episode. People spiral in isolation. Remote work, small apartment, dark northwest winter. It makes sense. It made sense. I needed it to make sense. At 2:17 in the morning, I heard it, a sound from below the floor, slow and deliberate, a dragging like something heavy pulling itself through a tight space. It moved from one side of the apartment to the other over the course of about 4 minutes, and then it stopped, directly beneath my bed. I was standing in the hallway. I had not moved to my bedroom, but the sound was there. Beneath the bed, I was not standing near. And in the silence that followed, in that horrible, held-breath silence, I heard something else. My name. Not spoken loudly, not shouted, murmured. Slow and wet and close, like a mouth pressed against the underside of the floor. Like something that had learned the shape of language, but hadn't quite gotten comfortable with it yet. It said my name the way you'd test a word in a foreign language, carefully, like it was savoring it. I grabbed my keys and my phone and I left. I drove to a 24-hour diner off the interstate and sat in a corner booth until the sun came up, and I have not been back to that apartment since. I've been staying with a friend in Olympia. I filed an official missing persons report for Marcus. I told him everything. I even brought the notebook. The detective I spoke to, a woman named Halverson, read through it quietly and told me it sounded like Marcus had been experiencing a mental health crisis. She kept the notebook as evidence. She said they'd look into the building. That was 6 days ago. Detective Halverson called me yesterday. She said they'd sent someone to check the basement of the building. Standard welfare check. She said the officer found nothing unusual. No signs of forced entry. No signs of anyone having been down there recently. Then she paused. And she said something that has not left me since. She said the officer did find one thing. A spiral-bound notebook. Black cover. Found in the far corner of the basement underneath a broken section of the concrete floor where it looked like the ground had been disturbed from below. She said the notebook had my name on the inside cover. I have never owned a black spiral-bound notebook in my life. She said the handwriting inside looked like mine. She said it described sounds in the walls, a shape in the hallway, a groove beside the bed. And at the bottom of the last page, written in letters almost too small to read, were 4 words. She wouldn't tell me what they said. She said she was still looking into it. She said I should find somewhere safe to stay and she'd be in touch. I'm safe. I'm at my friend's place. Every light is on. But last night, at 2:17 in the morning, I woke up to a sound I recognized immediately. Slow, deliberate, dragging, beneath the guest room floor. And if you're watching this, and you live in an apartment building, and you've ever heard something move through the dark beneath you, I want you to do one thing for me. Just one thing. Don't listen for your name. Because once it knows you can hear it, it won't stop. If this story kept you up tonight, you're not alone. Subscribe and come back together. We have more stories, and some of them aren't finished yet.